having some need or purpose or recognition in your life, that your concepts are not doing good enough, or within that domain, it's not doing good enough. Because a lot of time you wouldn't need that many dependencies. I mean, I think it could be simple enough to just go to species, genus, and all the way up. And I think usually that'd be good enough. Sometimes you can throw in dependencies and other things like that if you need further organization.
Yeah.
I mean,
But
at some point, yes, it would be a massive undertaking, but that's almost what learning is in your whole life. Every day you're putting something somewhere, and every day you're thinking. And it would, yes, it would be hard to do. And I don't know if you could even like start from scratch or something. You got to be strategic in the way you do it. It's more like that's how I'm thinking of it. Yes, those things are relevant, but it might be, you might need to strategize better. Like it would help to have more dependencies, and you can get closer and closer to a complete set of knowledge, but you can't, you just need to be strategic in your timing. That's all.
um, and then another way, do you think, because I don't necessarily have like, I can't tell you, oh, this will happen once I reorganize my concepts. I have no idea what will happen. All I know is that, like maybe you might say something to yourself. You say, I think I need to live up to my potential or whatever, but you're not clear on what potentially even is. So wouldn't that mean you need to like clarify that too? It's like any concept you use in thought, like you'd need to clarify. But then if you don't have the concept clearly, what doesn't seem like the answer is just don't say anything.
You could always be clearer. I mean, that's how I'm thinking of it. There would be some limits here. You can't just go forever, of course. You will have some unknowns. At any time you will. It's just you can minimize them and fix things up where you can, or ma- maximize them where you can. And as you go, yes, you would almost come to that throughout your life. You constantly do that in a way that is something you do all the time. You do
I
need to do
don't.
that all the time.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
maybe.
you have to be careful and being strategic and rational about it. As in, are you maximizing your thinking? In fact,
When you say, what do you mean, Matt? Are you maximizing your thinking, in fact?
like you want to maximize your thinking. You want to spend it in the most effective direction you can for the service of your life. It's not something you do for its own sake. You're doing this. The reason you even care to any extent, the reason matters is that it helps your life. And if in the process of using reason you're nitpicking every single little thing, no matter what, it would be ineffective. You wouldn't be actually thinking rationally. You're not actually doing something productive with your thinking. It'd be like obsessing over something over and over, which might be unnecessary. Which, like, yeah, sometimes deep questions are really important, but it's important to be strategic. Otherwise, it's just like ivory tower thinking, thinking for its own sake, rather than any purpose or end. To be like disinterested thinking, be more Kantian like. That's kind of what Kant did. Like you're
Right.
thinking divorced from whatever point the concepts are, thinking divorced from your life. It's there's rationality, and then the which is separate and distinct from human thinking and living.
So then would you say you said be strategic and do clarify the concepts that will be most effective in helping you live well. But then would you say the way to do that would be to focus on those concepts that are important to philosophy, and then focus on concepts that not just you're unclear on and use in your thinking sometimes, but concepts use in your thinking a lot, or that are part of a big decision you have to make and you're unclear on. So the distinction is, obviously there's philosophy, that's one approach, but that could
Yeah.
be infinite. So determining the depth of that is a different question. So we'll put the philosophy thing aside for now, but focusing on the strategic approach being, obviously I can think in a, like when I'm navigating through life, I use certain concepts to think, but sometimes the concepts I use in the thoughts are not very clear, but the specific end goal is not, it's not a big decision, it's not that important. So I might not get into those, but the strategic approach then would be to only clarify the concepts that are part of a proposition that involves, that's related to some big thing in your life? Like you feel it's very important. Would you say that's accurate?
Generally, I feel generally that's a rational strategy because you're putting in the context of you reason as a means of survival. You don't reason as a means of just entertaining yourself or something. Like there's a purpose behind this usually. Yeah, you could think to entertain yourself sometimes, and that's okay sometimes. But I mean, that's what I mean by strategic thinking too. That you can't just think about whatever. In some way, you're thinking about like your hierarchy of values. Like for me, psychology is pretty high up there, so it's
Yeah.
always very worth it to me to distinguish things about that. In economics, not so much. I mean, I'm familiar with it and kind of get it pretty
Yeah.
good, but I don't need to study all the little details of what inflation is versus superinflation versus like what the Fed has to do with that. Like, I kind of know, I get the idea, but I don't really have the time to focus on that. I mean, yeah, I'm sure I could get a lot clearer on my thinking with economics, but I have some good fundamental concepts in it. I studied what I was interested in.
Yeah.
I'm able to think very clearly with to the extent I know. I'm not going to go claiming I know how the Fed affects inflation rate. I really have no idea.
Right.
But whereas psychology, I think about that a lot of time. Or art does have a lot of meaning to me, so I really do enjoy consuming art and thinking about it, what
Yeah.
it stands for, and or just like you, like I think like epistemology matters a lot to me because it's just my the way I think. I mean, I put a lot of focus on things. I'm not big on like going out in the world and doing things. Like I like things in the world, but it's not really my forte or strength. I'm not going to spend time like improving my body as much,
Yeah.
which is fine if people do. But I think epistemology is like a great way to strategic thing to think about. Or just like you, I think you get a lot of think about epistemology. So for us talking about say concept formation, it seems like a valid and worthwhile investment in time compared to say going into the details of philosophy of ethics. Like you're not as into ethics. I mean, you know about it, we can talk about it a little bit, but it's not really what's going to shape you as much. And it's not what you're even as enthused to think about either.
Well, I think that, yeah, you're right. But only because in my case, I don't understand a lot. Like I don't believe, like it's hard for me to believe something if I don't understand. I'm like, well, why is
Right.
this true? And then that eventually leads to the interest in epistemology, which is like, if I'm not clear on all these things and I feel a fog, then you
Right.
end up at epistemology, right? Because that's what seems to be serving your questions. Like it's answering those questions you have. Or at
Yeah, I
least for
think
me, it
people
is.
like us, or at least for whatever background we have, it seems like we both can relate to this more skeptical way of thinking, questioning tons of things. I mean, I relate to that very well. I entirely understand what you're thinking about, but I think that's why maybe we find value in epistemology because we ask so many questions. It's incredibly valuable to us when we can understand what's concepts, how do we form them, really being hard on,
Yeah.
maybe not hard on ourselves, but really careful about our thinking. And I think that lends itself to why it's valuable to you to think about epistemology, why it's valuable to me, because for our lives, it seems to shape us even maybe more than anything else.
Um, when you say shape us, you mean helps our thinking generally?
Yeah, help us attain our goal of living. I mean,
Right.
everybody has to do it a little differently. We
Right.
can't all go through the same path. Some of us maybe had bad habits growing up, and maybe I did too. So it helps me more to go through this process to bring myself to rational thought than maybe somebody else might prefer. Ethical thinking might do help them a bigger extent.
Right.
I mean, in the end, I think they get to the same place,
Right.
understanding how to live their life better. But we can't all
Right.
take the same path, of course.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right on that. Um, yeah, so basically like a value-driven approach, which is uh, it's I guess it's not always you like talking of us being skeptical and questioning everything. Sometimes being driven by feeling though is not the right approach either. So that's why, we
Right.
were discussing like Well, what is the strategic approach? Like,
Right.
how do you define? We don't need to get into it.
Yeah, I know what
I'm
you're
going to
saying.
ask you to induct what strategic is.
Yeah, it is so difficult. Yeah.
But yeah, I guess it's so, but you would agree with me then, obviously there's so many, at least for me, there's so much that I feel foggy on. Like my default has definitely been in the past, like, even though I like the clarity and I liked, especially the fiction, my default has, I feel like a lot of the time has been fog. And so if you just feel it all the time, the approach should be, or if you feel it a lot of the time, not all the time, but in a lot of concepts that are abstract, the approach, you would agree then that the approach should be, you wouldn't clarify everything, but you'd clarify, and even if sometimes it's involved in a thought, you don't have time to clarify that. You just focus on those things that are like really big decisions or like very important. And from there you can branch out, but it's like, try and focus on those to the best of your ability, those things that seem like they're part of some big thought. Would you agree with
Yeah,
that?
that's a good approach, I think. And not just doing what you can with your concepts, but also sometimes trusting your concepts more. It's hard to get into that. Like, I've experienced sometimes that I don't trust my own knowledge enough that I want to question it, even though I have no reason to question it. I have no
Yeah.
evidence to question it. And I should
Yeah.
just say, like, I could be wrong, but if I am, I'll find out someday. But right now, I have no reason to think I am. I might discover I'm wrong, and that's just something I have to deal with. But right now, I'm taking what I do know and trying to figure out what I know I don't know.
Right.
The known unknowns, as you might put it.
Yeah. I mean, there's different things in there though, right? There's like, um, there's things you can have certainty about and there's things you can't, like, which I'm gonna write something about later. But um, I think that the things you can have certainty about are what I'm interested in. And by the way, what you're saying with this skeptical thinking, which I like, I'm similar. Um, Remember I said to you when I started reading Opar and I was like, wow, I just felt this clarity when, because I always used to go, how do I know this is true? How do I really know? Whatever, get in this loop that didn't make sense. And then there was this part in Opar where he writes about what you can reduce every question to an identification. Consciousness is identification. So every question is reducible to some form of identification. So if you ask, like there are a few examples given. Why reduces to what is the cause. Um, when reduces to what is the time or place, or where reduces to what is the place, and then how reduces to what is the process. And so then after that, I remember asking myself, like, how do I know this is really true? Blah, blah, blah. Not about that specific thing, but something else. And then I reduced, how do I know this is true, to what is the method by which I validate this specific thing I'm having trouble with? And then I felt the clarity, right? Like, so you can do that with your concepts, but it's like, if there's a lot of them that, and I mean like fully clear, like, okay, it relates to that thing I can point to. But it's just like, if you, at least for me, for a lot of my concepts are not like that, then yeah, in some situations you don't have time. You just go, well, I just have to go with this and find out.
Yeah, those definitely do happen. I mean, that's why we were talking about like risk management and operating in uncertainty. That's actually a very interesting thing to study and think about because that's almost what most of the time is. Like, there's a
Right.
lot we do know, but there's a lot we don't. Like the other day, I was going through something stressful about a friend of mine, but like there were so many unknowns that I literally could not know
Yeah.
that were bugging me. It was like they're unknowable. I have nothing I could do when I really should only focus on what I know. I mean,
Right.
these what ifs are like it's arbitrary thinking. I have no evidence to make these other claims. I just need to focus on the knowledge I have, accept what uncertainties I do have, and put those aside as I can't think rationally about them in the sense that I don't have enough information. I can't use them to do anything other than to say, I don't know what to do about these sort of questions. So I have to figure out something else. I have to, what can I think about? What do I have evidence for? Or taking into account the uncertainty I do have, are there elements of it that I can make more certain? like um, you might be, well, I don't know, I mean, a simple example would be like buying a lottery ticket, which you have a very low chance of winning. And you might just think of one thing you do know is you're spending $1, regardless of if you win or not. Like that much is certain. Your winning could be uncertain, but you can maybe make decisions as related to what you do know, that you're certain that you spend $1 on the ticket, and you're certain that you drive to the gas station to pick it up.
Yep.
I mean, you could take certain things in it that you have no doubt about, and maybe compare to something you're uncertain about. Like what if I did win $1 million? Would that justify driving 5 minutes out of my way to pick up the ticket? Maybe not. Would it be justified to drive to 3,000 miles to buy a lottery ticket for $1? I mean, you know for certain that you're going to drive 3,000 miles, regardless of if you win or not. So it's difficult to measure, but what I'm getting at is at least when you are making the decision, you use what you're certain of and acknowledge what you can't know just yet. Like you can't know if you'll win. That's
Yep.
almost like unknowable.
Yeah, it's I think you're the only person who takes an interest in that, and I would, is someone who feels, well, actually, this is psychologizing, so it's not true, but because it's actually, this is why I'm interested in it more so than why anyone else is. But for me, it's because my interest in that kind of detail of like analyzing like how to think about uncertainty and things like that is because I don't think I feel about it. I think about it well by default.
Yeah.
And then you do get into that kind of like thought process. But obviously some people don't, their default method of operating seems to be functioning fine in that respect. Well, who knows? You never know, because you can't read into other people. But yeah, I mean, that's my interest in it for sure. It's like, and then epistemology seems to deliver answers, but not answers in terms of like, this is exactly what the answer to this thing is, but more like in this, it lets you separate what you know for sure and what you don't know. And then you can think about it better. You're like, okay, this is just something you don't know. You have to go out into reality or you have to wait and see what happens in reality, but you have no control over it. And so it lets you separate those things. Whereas if you don't know how to separate them, to me, that can become chaos.
Yeah. I mean, so that's kind of relating to what we're just about to do here. I mean, I'll say that is a method. So what did you want to ask about or think about regarding methods?
Yeah, so I just wanted to go over my approach for trying to clarify it with you. And I used some of the stuff I got from the How to Know book. But anyway, I just wrote down, so some of the synonyms that immediately came to mind are way, like a way to do something, which to me is a metaphor, like the way you go, on a road. So it's actually referring to the same thing. Synonyms, process, procedure, or method is the same thing, so I can get rid of it. Technique, principles, tactic, approach. I just put those as, so sometimes people are referring to the same concept when they're using this.
Yes, I think so.
And then, so select one or two or three clear examples of the units as foils, one or two near relatives.
Where did you get that wording from? I mean, I'm just curious.
How to Know, the book. I just went to a very specific section on definitions.
Binswanger's book.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that too.
Cool. What I try to do is, what I noticed my mind was doing is that it could throw out just associations like, a method, the medical method, but I don't even know what that is. I have no firsthand experience. I've not looked at anything related to it. And so I really try to stick to things that like I've actually read about or I've seen or something like that, and so they're more personal in that I have firsthand experience of them. So I just wrote down the mystery method, which is some claimed method for sleeping with women. It's this guy who wrote a book about he's got like an attraction model. It's based on evolutionary biology and this kind of thing. And it's a bit it's a bit detailed and all this. But anyway, the point is it's like a specific method, do this, there's this stage. It's got, and it's got a theory. So it's got theory and a set of actions. And then cognitive behavioral therapy, which is like correcting beliefs by trying to identify what the emotions seem to project, and then reminding myself that the belief is untrue with a logical statement countering it. Yeah, so there's like books about, emotions are based on beliefs, and then you identify what the core belief is and you try and correct it. So that, I would say that's a method, like implementing that is a method.
I can think of other even simpler ones.
What? Yeah, give me some more. That's funny because it's what I thought of, which are like these. What are other
lasagna recipe? Lasagna recipe.
Would you say that's a method though?
Yeah, it's telling you these are all the steps you do to create lasagna. I mean, any recipe I consider a method. They give you the method, they write it out.
Oh, because that wouldn't fit into the way I was conceptualizing, but okay, lasagna recipe.
Or we could think of maybe they're even near relatives. We'll think about it, but I would consider these recipes, or I don't know, like, let's see, a blueprint for a building.
A building's blueprint?
Yep.
Schematic? I don't know.
See, I don't know first
experience. Better. I have a recipe. Well, like, I know what a recipe looks like.
Or I mean, a Lego instructions. If you ever made a Lego set, I mean, you could think of that as a schematic.
Right. This goes to procedure. In my mind, I don't know if it could still be the same thing. Anyway, okay, cool. Well, let's stick. That's enough, I reckon. We'll keep those in there.
Yeah.
And then I did near relatives, the sun rising and setting and creating day or night. I'm not sure if these are right, but this is just what I tried to do. Animals growing, then slowly dying, putting on a sock.
Yes.
I wasn't sure though, but I just put them in. I don't know if that was informed by the fact that I already thought the genus was process, but whatever. Like, that's what I got. And then process a series of whatever. Identify the genus that includes all the. I just wrote. I wasn't clear on process either, but I just put this in: a series of causes and effects resulting in one final effect. And so that's the genus. That's what's in common with these things, the near relatives, and these things, which are the method.
Okay, we got a process for these. Yeah, because we're even including the things that might not be part of it. So we're saying things are even similar, but not methods. I mean, or at least things you are near sunrise is near relative, and you are trying to find what is it that relates all of these things together.
Yeah, we're looking at the conceptual, the CCD.
Yes. The CCD of method would be about process.
The CCD of method is that it's a process, yes.
Yes.
A kind of process. Ask what fundamentally differentiates the units from their relatives in that genus. So I just did purpose and study. And I said study because when I had these two examples only, I know that they both involve a theory, whether it's right or wrong, it's irrelevant, but they both involve a theory. And that's why I thought, like, they're purposive. If there's a purpose you're doing, it's a human doing them, which separates it from, sun rising and setting. But there's also a theory. So like some kind of study involved. Would you say, given these, would you say that like there's something different or?
Well, would you say there's something different? I mean, just what do you think?
I don't know. I think it's a tough one. I think they could be, there's definitely something slightly different there. Like I wouldn't put, for example, it's not that it's even not in the same category, but I wouldn't put like following a lasagna recipe in the same category as applying the method of CBT. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
there's definitely a different, I don't know if it's a matter of degree, or there's some different in the quality, but there is a difference. Or like even someone implementing the mystery method, and like that, these things are like okay, so the difference is there are a complicated series of actions taken over a span of time and informed by a theory. In this case, in these first two, between, say, a lasagna recipe, whereas a lasagna recipe is a series of actions taking according to some form of knowledge, but it's usually not that spanned out, not that complicated in terms of the actions. The
Yeah.
context isn't varying that much, so there
Let's
is
come
that
back to
difference.
mine. Because let's start with the ones you had, because I think throwing mine is a monkey wrench into that. So we'll put mine aside for now. We'll stick with yours. You're correct about yours there. You say a purpose and a study. Like, well, what do you mean a study exactly?
Yeah, so that's the best word I could find. I mean, like what I was referring to is that there is a theory behind it. It's almost like the method itself has thought put into it too. It's not, it's like if you're just talking about putting on a sock, well, there's nothing. But if you're suddenly, like, there's a whole study of how to efficiently put on socks, and like you should use this muscle and use your thumb there, then that becomes a method, because it's like there's a form of study involved in it. But if it's just like one action, or if it's a few actions, it doesn't, there's just by study, I mean like, I guess, yeah, conscious thought and theory involved.
Okay.
Well, there's
I
conscious
think that,
thought in lasagna, so I don't, yeah.
yeah, I mean, well, don't worry about the lasagna yet. When we make the definition, we can then say, how do we work with these? We'll do that next, but let's just start with mystery method, clean method for attracting. Okay. And those are, and well, all these things have a process. The sun rising, that's a process. Mystery method process, cognitive therapy process. I mean, because things are happening. I mean, that much we know. So you have a series of cause and effect.
Yep.
But this, at least what Ito says, you have this CCD. When you get to the narrower concept, in this case, which would be method, we have to treat the process as as a new CCD of method. So the CCD of method would be a series of actions or a series of causes and effects. So if we want the distinguishing characteristic of method, what kind of series of causes and effects are we speaking of? I mean, what you're distinguishing in some
Purposive, which
narrower
includes
way,
volitional.
right? So
To
we
me,
got purposive.
yeah.
That's true. That's right. That you can use an additional characteristic as well. So we could have purposive as in volitional. I mean, that's the range of characteristics we are speaking of. Like we're excluding the sun, of course, because
Maybe
that's not
also,
volitional.
maybe scientific instead of study. So meaning involving some form of specialized study, not on behalf of the person applying the method, but the method itself.
Right. And that would be valid to do. You can add in another characteristic as well to assist with this distinction. And that would be valid to do. At least Rand said that's perfectly fine to do. You can have the narrator characteristic, and you can sometimes add additional characteristics as well.
Right. But then you're not, yeah, I mean, but it's confusing to think that purpose is, so the CCD is a series of cause and effect actions, but to then say that purpose is a specific measurement of a series of causes and effects. There's something weird about in my mind to say that, but
Or you could even just say change to volitional, or something put on started by volitional series of causes and effects, or series of causes and effects began by volition. You're
I didn't
specifying.
I didn't say volitional because then that would include putting on a sock.
Would that be wrong? Would that
Um,
be, if you had to do that, then why not do that?
but then, because there is something different about applying CBT or someone reading Mystery Method and trying to talk to women than there is about putting on a sock. There's definitely something different there, which is
Well, if you're
the,
thinking that way, you could just say, well, then we actually have another subdivision to do that would make sense. You would have volitional, then maybe you could subdivide it to, say, scientific methods. And you, because you'd want to still distinguish from putting on socks. I mean, you could do it that way too. If you would still be included, that's fine. It just, you're still excluding sun rising and animals growing, then slowly dying.
Yeah. But I still don't, at least see, I don't know if this is right, but I don't think of putting on a sock as a method. Like when I put on my sock, I don't think of the process of putting on a sock as there being any particular method to it. It's just, I mean, maybe if you study it extensively, I don't know. That's confusing.
It just seems like by your definition, it fits. It works fine. Yeah, you don't usually think of it that way, but if it fits your definition and there's no problems here by doing that, then it's like maybe, hey, maybe I should. I mean, that's kind of what my approach would be. It's like, I can't have a reason not to. I mean, that's
Right.
how I'm thinking of it.
But
Do you actually have a reason not to? Besides, you're not used to it.
I don't know if that's, I don't, just because you can't have a reason not to doesn't mean it's valid, or you can't think of a
I
reason
have no
not to.
evidence to say you shouldn't, is maybe the better way to phrase it.
But what about the fact that there does seem to be something different about them? Like at least the examples I have, like with these two, first putting on a sock, they just seem to be, and the difference can be explained in terms of the complexity of action and the amount of thought put into it. And the fact that these both involve theories, which is, there's almost no theory about putting on socks. So
You could say, well, as far as purposes in scientific, no, it definitely isn't. So if we had process to purposive and scientific, that would be fine. You would just say there's maybe a separate kind of process, and we can reason about it separately. Like, but since it is volitional, it's volitional but not scientific. You could say it would just mean it's, I don't know, maybe you just have a different subcategory under process. Get a process, and you can just create another one for sock, whatever you want. I mean, maybe you don't use volitional, or maybe they're both volitional, but they're distinguished on something else. Or you would, if you're in that situation, you just find a way to categorize it then.
Right. Yeah, this is why it's really hard and tricky, because I could spend ages and I've just done one concept and I haven't even done the one concept. And then I get why in understanding objectivism, he just wrote, some people start in the philosophy and then they just throw it all away, because it's like they start this and they're like, this is impossible. You can't, I guess this is just, you just you just kind of give up in frustration and say, this is who I am. I can't do anything about it. I totally get it, because this
I
is
have a
like
different way
ridiculous.
of representing this. Like, okay, so you're saying you got person scientific, then you got systematic, and then you've got these other things, that other methods which we don't care about right now. Like we don't care about sun rising. Like just literally nothing to do with these.
Yeah.
So I mean, just go 2 lines down. I'm just gonna start a new thing. Just it'll be simple. Just go to a new line. So type process, because that's at least the root of what we're dealing with right now. So under process, we have, I don't know, you want method is what you're getting at.
Yeah.
So under process writes volitional, like you can say, I don't know, volitional process. And delete method there. I'm just going to try to visually show you this. Get rid of where it says method. Volitional process. And so you got a volitional process as, those could be, what belongs in there would be, say, CBT, would be one volitional process, and then another volitional process would be a lasagna recipe. Or say putting on a sock. Let's just do putting on a sock. Just because you're saying putting on a sock is volitional, we'll use that. And all these things can be volitional processes, of course, but you're saying a volitional process is not method alone. You're saying that a method is CVT.
Oh, okay.
So
Got it.
you have volitional process. Well, what's another distinction you use to point out that it's a method? What else do you use to say method here? And you said scientific. That's what you said.
Okay.
So volitional
Scientific.
process that is scientific, that's method.
Yep.
And then my discussion with you would just be better about just like, well, does this make sense the way we use language? Like, this is valid. This is fine. You can do it this way. But then people might look at you weird because some people might say lasagna is a recipe is a method, like me. Like, if you said that to me, it's like, well, what about recipes? Then you would answer me like, oh, well, the difference is like, well, you could say lasagna recipe is a volitional process, but it isn't scientific, so it can't be a method. But then I might wonder, well, I think it deserves a special designation, something. I mean, maybe you just call it recipe. A recipe is a type of volitional process. Or what makes something a recipe different from a method? You would have to ask, you have to say, well, what about a volitional process when making a recipe is different from CVT? What it distinguishes it from other volitional processes?
Yeah, maybe recipe and everything else would be under there, but it would be a matter of degree. That would make more sense.
Yeah, you can call them, I don't know, more systematic and less systematic.
Yeah.
That could be valid. Or you give them a separate category under volitional process.
Yeah, okay.
So you got options there. Either way, it's valid, but you might find more efficient ways to organize them. But using it this way, you wouldn't be confused, be kind of relatively straightforward to think about any of these. You can change it around in the future, but here it's still valid. You just might want to reorganize later. And if anything wound up that in a discussion or something that you realize, wait, hey, this might not actually be the best arrangement, but it's still valid here. Works fine.
Question for you about systematic, which I originally did systematic purposeful process, but so when you can you use this kind of thing in a definition? Because whereas like when I describe something as methodical or strategic, I'm not saying that it is the concept. I'm saying that it shares some characteristics with the concept strategy, but not necessarily the same thing. Or methodical shares some characteristics with the concept method, but isn't necessarily so. And so anytime you use these kind of descriptive terms, aren't you in some way being vague, like, and not just going back to, like when I say a method is systematic, what part of system or the concept what characteristics am I using? It's unclear. Like, that's still not.
Well, that's the way you phrase that is more like the family resemblance way of thinking.
Right.
That it shares some resemblance, but it's not necessarily the thing. And all we're doing is getting like approximations.
Yeah, that's what it feels like.
Here, like Rand would say that those measurements aren't lost. It still shares all the characteristics above. It just has something more distinguishing here. Like, you abstract something away sometimes. Like, all scientific methods have a process in it. They share every characteristic of process, but they have something additional about them, something additionally distinguishing.
Right. But then when I say a method is a systematic process, then I'm saying that this specific form of process shares some characteristics with systematic, but I'm not telling you what characteristics. It could be essential ones, it could be inessential ones. Like, it's not, am I right in thinking that it's still not clear if I use this kind of way of defining, because it doesn't tell me if I'm saying systematic, yes, I'm saying it's a kind of process, but I'm not saying this kind of process, what what exactly does it share with whatever the concept systematic is? Like that remains unclear. And then in that case, I am going to the family resemblances thing, not the theory, but just if I define words like this, I am sort of being vague.
Um, so systematic would, wait, if you're saying it is systematic, it would share all the characteristics that are distinguishing about systems. I mean, they all possess that distinguishing characteristic, and it would include would it include all the characteristics subsumed in the concept?
That's what, I mean, that was my question too. Like, what is going on here grammatically when I don't know. Man, this stuff is ridiculously hard. I don't know how you go about like.
I guess there's an element of, I get what you're saying. I'm trying to think of a more concrete example because you're making it sound a bit vague, though, even the way you're asking it. But I
Okay,
sort of know what you mean. Let's try to think of an example of where
Yeah,
you
okay.
actually do such a thing.
Okay. Um, hmm. We need to jump onto what's a concept that I could jump onto.
I'm trying to think of, it's hard to think of somebody doing that. I'm not saying there isn't an example, but I'm trying to think.
I can't think of one right now.
Yeah, maybe we should put that one aside until
Yeah, let's